David Zritsky for the Bond Experience. Welcome back. Now, Bond is somebody that we emulate for a lot of different reasons. His calm, his cool, his spy intrigue. But we also look at his lavish lifestyle. I mean, his location hopping, his joie de vivre for clothing and style. Wrist roll, anybody? Skyfall watch. But there is another aspect of Bond that we also truly covet, and that is his zeal, his passion for fine dining. And I couldn't think of a better guest and a better person to talk about how do you bring these aspects into your real world than my next guest. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Bagnold. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hello, David. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It's so nice to see you. I know this is virtual. It's not as good as the last time we saw each other in London.
It doesn't matter. It's it's just wonderful to say hello, be on your show. And yeah, even though it's completely and utterly bleak here.
You know what? We're going to brighten things up then, because we're going to be talking about some of the most wonderful things in our life. I want to peel things back because my audience loves good storytelling. And we're going to be talking about some unbelievably immersive, Bond-inspired, Fleming-inspired sometimes experiences that you create out of your passion. But in order to do this successfully, we've got to talk about what is your passion and where did it come from? So what are we talking about today? What is that passion?
Well, I mean, all roads really, for me, lead to good food. I mean, it always has done since an early age. Everyone's got to eat, you know. And if we can, we may as well eat well. I mean, I have two elder brothers, and when I was growing up, I mean, it seemed like every other year there was some sort of birthday or sort of graduation or some celebration. And very lucky, Dad used to always take us out to nice restaurants in Mayfair and London, and I sort of suddenly realized, you know, this sauce is really sticky and lovely, and all these wonderful things are just, that's a reduction. I didn't know I was having a proper reduction and a jus. So it's always been with me. But my epiphany for this came when I had my very first 3 Michelin starred experience. I mean, this is about 20 years ago for a friend's 30th birthday, and I mean that was the moment where I just realized, why has it taken this long, or to realize this? Why aren't we doing more of this at every stage? And holy smoke, I mean, this is how we should be. So, and that was the trigger that really made me think I need to do more of this. Sorry.
No. Again, I'm turning into like a psychiatrist, and you're on the couch. You're my patient, but I want to stick with the childhood, because one of the things that I find is some of our biggest connections to nostalgia and therefore passion is coming from our childhood. It's that recapture of things. And it's interesting to hear that food, even at an early age, was something that was, I don't want to say it's a reward, but it was this experience that you could appreciate. At the same time, were you also, as a child, as a young man, being introduced to James Bond?
Well, yeah. So I grew up with, as we all did, watching the Bond films, and I'm guilty of quoting them. And myself, my brother, just every other day, every lunch, every time we were together. And Mum would always used to make all these lovely elaborate sauces. She's Norwegian, I'm half Norwegian, so all the emulsions and mayonnaises with fish are all very important in Norwegian cooking and cuisine. The pølselumper, which is sort of like essentially hot dogs in a potato pancake, and it's a staple of Norwegian cuisine.
Okay.
These things that I grew up with were just they were the staple. Sunday lunch, which is a very big thing in the UK. So for the family to come around and have a roast of some sort of Sunday lunch, we would normally depart quickly to the kitchen as soon as it was finished to eat the rest of the spuds and the Yorkshire puddings and drink the blood of the beef on the chopping board. Just everything that we could. So Bond and food very, very prevalent in upbringing.
I love hearing this, because again, we're playing dark detectives here, if you will, in the sense, and this is not a Batman show, but I'm trying to piece it together, because childhood, all these aspects, then you try 20 years ago, your first Michelin star.
The first 3 Michelin stars. So
Michelin stars.
Yeah, so I had good meals, and it must when I was younger. It must have happened inadvertently that I was in some very good places. But the first active, we are going to what should be the pinnacle of culinary experiences. That the Michelin guide, there are many guides, by the way, but let's just say the Michelin guide, it's 1, 2, and 3 stars that they have wherever they are in the world, and 3 is the very, very top. So it was the first time I'd had one of those, and there was just something about this. It was very simple. It was just a slice of fig that had been broiled and caramelized. The sweetness of the juice just started to trickle on this piece of foie gras, and I just remember thinking that was just utterly insane how good that was. I mean, I was on a new plane. It wasn't even my dish; it was my friend's. So it was just from that moment, as I mentioned, it was just, we need to do more of this rapido.
I've got to ask a question too, and again, I'm not trying to be a blunt instrument here. Excuse the pun. I want to ask the why behind this experience, because I want to first go back to an experience that I had when I was at GoldenEye, and I was at the Ian Fleming Villa, and one of the people that worked for Ian Fleming was talking to me, and he said that Ian Fleming would take, almost like Bond in his books, ridiculous pleasure in the pomp and circumstance of food and drink. Not so much the flavors. I mean, yes, they all had to be there. It had to be a wonderful experience actually eating and drinking, but even making a drink, making the food, setting the plate, the atmosphere, the lighting, like he would take ridiculous pleasure and almost painstaking tactics to do that. And then I know he imparted that into his Bond, where Bond's drink, he wanted to be very good and very cold and made very well. Was this part of that for you? Is that the pomp and circumstance around the food?
It is and it isn't, actually. It's of course I like that when it happens, and there are times when that suits. I mean, the more I got into food, the more I really started focusing on the food itself. However, and that all, by the way, just came from after that epiphany I had. I ended up somehow dining and taking notes and photos and have a discussion of I went around every single Michelin-starred restaurant in the country, and I think I may be possibly the only one of, if not the only person that's done that. And that was just purely a labor of love. Paid for it all myself. It was all completely independent, so I could just get a full taste of it. But it's on that journey. It's great to pick up which places are good for certain instances, which are good for celebrations, which are really good for the pomp and ceremony. And there are some that really, really pull that off well. And there are some that just don't. And there are some that actually don't really want to do that at all. I mean, there's an X3 Michelin star restaurant in Tokyo that in order to get to it, you had to go through an underground car park, like a basement car park. And they absolutely don't stand on ceremony just getting to it or where it was. During the meal, completely different thing. Obviously, it's the finest ingredients and produce, but perhaps in the world. But no, there are some. There is a lovely cause for it when the time deems. So I'm not anti it at all. I just it's very much about the food these days, wherever that is, whether it's a Michelin-starred street stall in Singapore or Mexico City, or whether it's the grandest place. Actually, the thing for me is the food and the wine together, and the absolute explosions that happen there. Yeah.
So tell me what the tipping point, the turning point, if you will, the transformation of going to experiencing these wonderful moments yourself and loving that and almost like a hobby and a passion, to then suddenly wanting to create those experiences for others.
Right. Yeah. So that was quite simple. So it was actually during COVID. So whilst I've been a Bond fan all my life, it's I suppose I'm a sort of sleeper agent for those sorts of things. In that, during COVID, that all the restaurants, obviously, in the whole hospitality industry, shut down. So there were no places to go and review, etc. And I took upon myself another project, which is my father had his original Fleming novels on his shelf at all times. And he always said, you should read these. And I just thought, okay, no restaurant review. So I read all of them. And as I read them, I literally couldn't believe how much detail there was on everything, but also food. And it turns out that he enjoyed my hero actually enjoyed some of the favorite things in the world that I like. Not most notably, classic sauces, which is an absolute love affair of mine, in particularly Béarnaise. And on that note, I think it's chapter 22 of Diamonds Are Forever. It's called Love and Sauce Béarnaise, where he tells Tiffany Case that he would marry someone who could do. So she tries to make these slivers of steak with sauce Béarnaise for him. He has it in lamb and mougrec, etc. But I took a note of every single bit of food and drink that Bond ever had and created this rather large dossier of my own. And I always thought from the word go, I mean, wouldn't it be fun? How great it would be if we could actually dine like this, if we could dine like Bond, exactly like Bond. And so I put a few menus together, just different kinds, and played around. And I actually wanted to do this in real life for groups of people that we were all coming out of COVID, and No Time to Die was around the corner. So one of the first ones was for a group of distinguished clients who wanted something special. So we had a wine tasting, a champagne tasting, a Bond champagne tasting, followed by an actual screening in a private cinema. And then I did the meal, which was the Bond meal, the one we chose for that. And then I sort of started doing more and more, and it was just an absolute pleasure.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's amazing. Well, were these hardcore Bond fans? Were they sort of Bond fan light?
So, I mean, I wouldn't say they were the hardcore establishments of Bond fans. There are a lot of private clients and groups out there who would wish for something special and different and unique. And but it does surprise me. Virtually all roads lead to Bond in most circles. I mean, there are many different ideas and unique experiences with food that can take place, and there are. But I've never had any pushback with the Bond one, because everyone loves Bond seemingly. And
they weren't. What I like about this is they weren't coming expecting to, as some people say, cosplay as Bond. This isn't secret cinema where you're going there to pretend to be an agent or Bond. It's really to kind of soak yourself. I'll use the term marinate yourself into the culinary world of Bond or Fleming or things inspired by that particular world. Yeah. How do you, as a creator of these moments, really get into the, I'm going to call it authorship, because you're literally writing, if you will, and planning a scheduled journey, if you will, of this culinary. So how do you get into that mindset?
Well, the first thing is to make it as Bond-esque as possible. So it really, all the roads obviously have to go back to the novel. So there's a lot of research. And whilst I've got this dossier, I will continually go back to that and see what sort of works, what might be better. Seasonality is very important as well, obviously, because I mean, if I wanted to take someone to Scots, just like Bond took good nights, and have grouse, you can only do that between August and December. It's a very short game season, so that would be just sort of a small window. So there's seasonality, there's the menu itself, there are the dietaries of the guests that need to be taken into consideration. That can be a huge sway, but then there are obviously the venues where they have to take place, private chefs and private places and yachts and residents. So that's actually a little bit easier in terms of the logistics, because you have a lot more free reign. There are only so many places that have a really good Fleming or Bond connection, and I think it's probably rather wonderful to choose somewhere that is of that ilk. And then you've got to really just make sure that it's I have to make sure it's they can pull it off, and it has to be done well. So all of those go into the whole planning, and there's a lot of sit-down sessions with when one's doing it, with gent managers and sommeliers and executive chefs, and it's pretty difficult to get them all at the table. So that's where dining out quite a lot does help with that. But I don't know whether that's answered the question, but that's
absolutely no. I'd say again, we're peeling away the onion. I'm going to use all the food puns you can imagine. But I will say this: 15 minutes in, it's kind of time to announce that I've actually gone through my own Richard's Live and Let Dine journey, and it's worth talking about. And I want to set this up because we're going to show you something that will help recreate the moment, not perfectly, because you have to be in the moment to really appreciate it. But quick little story. So my good friend, our good friend, AJ Chowdhury, author of Some Kind of Hero, and Bond aficionado. I mean, everybody knows AJ. He knew that I was coming into London for a series of events, Bond events, fan events, community events, etc. And he said, "Can you make just a smidgen of time for some kind of experience?" And I said, "Well, sure, yeah. I mean, if it's a recommendation from you, of course. What is it?" And he goes, "Well, I can't tell you too much." And I'm like, "Well, you got to give me more than that." Because I mean, you could be, taking me into an alley and pummeling me. I don't know what's going on here. Remove a kidney, I'm gonna have a giant scar on my stomach. And he goes, "No. This is a culinary Bond experience, but that's literally all I'm going to tell you." He never told me where I was going, what I was doing. He made a quick introduction to you, and I looked you up, and I found your background fascinating, military, culinary. Your unique experiences, your love of Bond, it's all there in your website. But that was enough for me. I was super intrigued. And one of the greatest...
I'm sorry to interrupt.
This is all new, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my greatest joy before we went to London, because, transparently speaking, Danielle, is my wife, is great, but often she'll be thrust into these Bond things. And it's like, fandom. And it's like, it's a little much for someone that's not a hardcore fan. When she heard about this potential, this was her delight. And I will give you a sneak peek to the ending. The experience that we're about to see that you created for us that Friday afternoon at a very special location was her favorite Bond experience, not only on that trip, but literally in my entire Bond fandom to date.
Oh, wow.
Over 20 years of doing this. This was her favorite experience. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to show everybody a short video that you and your team captured.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about it. Okay?
Okay.
All right, let's go to the video.
Sounds good.
Wow. Okay. And again, I'm going to say this. The video does not do it justice. So what we need to do is, as good authors of this, we need to tell people, what did we just see?
Okay. Well, so I have done several of these for various private clients and corporate entities at different locations. And whilst they've been sort of on side with Bond, it's all been very nice. But I've never actually been able to. I didn't have the opportunity until now to do it for the core nucleus of the Bond community, which to have yourself and Danielle and AJ and Tim Everest, the Bond tailor of tailors in the same room doing what I've been doing. I've almost been sort of itching to do this for quite a while because they've been great to do, but not with the dare I say, the Bond royalty of today in the actual in one room. But and it needed. I thought it was a time to do something different. So where we were was a brand new private dining room that had opened, and it was just by pure coincidence that I was going to go to this place regardless, because it was on my hit list. I have to keep up to date each year with the Michelin guide as I've chosen, and there is a Michelin star chef in the background to this particular place, and so I thought, let's go. When I got there to have my first meal, I mean, all the dots just started coming together. The stars just like I almost couldn't believe how magnificent this could be to combine the two. And so I went again to go through the other half of the menu to make sure that the food was up to. And once I'd done that, I was really quite happy, because it could be the greatest place in the world, but if it doesn't have good food, or if it isn't, if they can't pull it off, then there's game over really. But so I wanted to absolutely check, and I was delighted because it genuinely was. And that from that point onwards, I thought, if you're going to do this, let's do it. Let's do it properly. And a lucky conversation with AJ, who I had actually had breakfast with in Fortnum. We had a Bond-esque breakfast together, which was another lovely event. And I was very aware of yourself, obviously, Dave, and I got wind that you were coming. So I thought, actually, if we can somehow do it, if Dave's got time, if there is time to do this, it'll be grand. And from the moment that it was looking likely, I immediately put my sort of restaurant reviewer hat and went back and had several meetings with the management and the head of events, the executive chef, the head sommelier, and the general manager. And it requires that to make sure that they can do the menu that I'm choosing, that is the Bond menu. And to my delight, it was possible. And so that was put in place. And I was very conscious. I hadn't told anyone anything. I didn't tell you anything, because I obviously I didn't want it. It would have sort of lost its impact if I'd said absolutely everything, perhaps. So I was very conscious that you were walking sort of blind, as it were, when we got there. But the whole impact was hopefully as we came up the really old school elevator that still had the dial that does that off the door, the private cast iron elevator to the rooftop, to the very place where it features very well in our minds in a certain scene. Aha, there it is, indeed. So that is I managed to get from the establishment a very nice photo of what it now looks like, and there is our restaurant at the top.
And we were eating in that, what do you call that, a turret? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, I thought it was a rotunda, but no, they're calling it a turret, and it has historic significance to the hotel during wartime. But that's now a converted private dining room, which is the one I thought, this would be really nice. It would also answer the question if there was any problems with the weather, because it's obviously completely encased. So we were good to go there. But moreover, I mean, I just thought, how nice would it be if we could all meet there and have some of Bond's favourite champagne, and then walk into an historic turret in a building that Fleming had actually had meetings in during the Second World War, overlooking the actual building of his office, the Admiralty on Horse Guards Parade, whilst where he conjured up all of the fantasy and all the creations for those books over there. and having a meal directly from there, from the creator himself. So we were dining like Bond himself in that little room. I mean,
So many worlds combined, and I've got to tell you, as a Bond fan and an appreciator of the fine things in life, I mean, that's one of the things we all adore about James Bond in general. Even approaching the building, I remember I was walking with AJ, and you don't know any of this because we haven't talked about this. Even approaching the building itself, AJ was building up a certain amount of excitement, but it's a gorgeous, gorgeous building with the right pomp and circumstance and doormen and people opening doors. And there's greeters in the lobby that are greeting you and asking, can they take your coats and this and that. There's so many Bond-like moments. You're immediately immersed. And I felt, I'm going to put it like this. I felt three worlds colliding. Now, stay with me on this, Richard, because you and I haven't talked about this. I felt the David Zaritsky world of reality, obviously. I felt the Fleming world, and I felt the Bond world. I felt the historical Fleming world and Bond as a fictional character all combining. You're right. The elevator going up, which was filled with mystery. I mean, where are we going? What's going to open up? But this kind of old world charm that I think so much of us forgotten in this high tech. I mean, look at this, ding, ding, ding. We're on a StreamYard right now world. But then when it opened up and you feel the wind rushing against you because you realize you're in an inside outside moment. And then it opens up to the skyline and I wore my Skyfall watch, Aquaterra, for a reason. Right. It opens up into the world that you recognize as this was Bond's view. In Skyfall, this was what he was looking out on and contemplating his own future. And as you take in the wind, the sound, the feelings of London, and to your point, you get this chilled champagne being served to you. What happens is, and I really want to paint this story to my viewers, is suddenly, Richard, you become our guide and our Sherpa. You're telling me about the champagne, the location. You are the narrator in the story that I am living with Bond and Fleming. And you kept doing that. And this is why I said the video doesn't pay it truly forward. No. You kept it through, whereby when we sat down and we were trying all of the food and all of the experiences and the sights, the sounds, the aromas, you were then narrating us to keep us in this world, and even reading excerpts and having us read. And so there was participation. I felt like you were the orchestra leader in this beautiful symphony of food and sound and experiences. And I'm going to say this too, and you would never admit this because you're looking at the most humble person in the world. Without you there and without you orchestrating this, it would be a wonderful dining experience, but it wouldn't be that elevated impact that us Bond fans look for.
Oh, that's very kind words to you, David. Really, sincerely. I mean, it was the lovely bit. Whenever I do this, it is those reactions which I absolutely I love. It all comes together when I saw the expressions of yourself and AJ and Tim as we came on the roof. The smiles that when it clicked. Oh, I know where we are, and all those words you just spoke about it. That's what does it for me. That's the most wonderful opening, and of course, I was delighted to be a form of curator of the or navigator of the food and drink that we had, because there's so much in the books that it's almost like 14 in some way they're 14 brand new stories when I went through them, because some of the films are nothing like them, and all of the food that he had, and we can talk about any of that if you like as well. Just the differences between what we think about Bond and what he actually had, but going right to the source, having what he had. And the whole thing was just a complete delight for me, and I'm just so pleased that you enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it. I loved it, and again, Danielle is still talking about it, even from a comparison standpoint to some of the things.
Didn't know that, David. I mean, the fact that she put that as her number, that's a significant compliment of the highest proportions.
And it's something I want to paint, because I think there are people watching this right now who are quickly, 25 minutes in saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to do this," and they're saying to themselves, but how do I get my spouse involved? You don't need to get your spouse involved. Your spouse will become involved just by the sheer joy of it. But I will say this, I don't want to give too much away with the food. I want to talk about one aspect, because
Sure.
I think this one aspect to me exemplifies all the things that we're talking about. Because correct me if I'm wrong, each one of the experiences that you create is like a thumbprint. They're all going to be different. There's no off the shelf. You're not going to get, the same exact thing every time. But there was a moment in this where you brought out Wagyu, and you tied it with You Only Live Twice. You tied it with sake. Tell us about that pairing and experience, because I think this is perfect representative of this.
Sure. Well, I mean, it was a real delight to do that, because there are so many variants of Wagyu out there. And I mean, the word itself, Wagyu, it literally translates to Wa is Japanese and Gyu is beef. And if it's not directly from, say, black Tajima cows from Japan, it's basically, it's not imitation Wagyu, but it's just not the same thing.
Yeah.
Having had I'm very lucky to have the very finest Wagyu in Kyoto and Tokyo and other places, whether it's Kagoshima beef, whether it's Kobe beef, or whether it's Miyazaki. I mean, they are like nothing that I've experienced before, and they're just absolutely. So I'm delighted, over the moon, that Bond has Wagyu when he's obviously in Japan, in the Fleming, in the original novel. And he pairs that with sake, and there are very different. There are different grades of sake. There are all different variants, and that all hinges back down to the shaving of the rice and how much purity you're getting in. But that was a lovely dish to get, and I knew that this place where we went to does that particularly well, and so I was delighted to get the book out at the time, because when he's presented this. In the novel, doesn't originally, he's actually a bit skeptical about it. He doesn't really sort of think, yeah, okay, I'll try it. And then he has it, and he's absolutely blown away. So yeah, the getting top grade Wagyu, and this private dining experience we had, they have their Wagyu flown in from Japan, so it is 100% Wagyu, yeah, the sauce was, I didn't say this, so as we toasted at the end, the sauce to go with it was that good. I felt obliged to raise my sauce beaker, because I ran out.
That. Yeah.
It's just that good. So that had to happen. But the Wagyu itself was wonderful, and it was great. I think it was, I think AJ just read out a little excerpt at that point from
he did. You can even see that in the video. He's kind of like lowering his, librarian like glasses, and I think he's reading from it. But the fact that you also had the sake at the right temperature, and you talked about temperatures, and what's a misunderstanding with temperatures. I mean, to me, all those little tidbits that's what Bond is. Bond. I always say that Bond is this. He has what's called hyper competency. And hyper competency means that you have an extreme understanding of something. And in your case, it is food, fine dining, drink, etc. And to be able to share that with a person like me that loves Bond, I feel like I'm going to use another, libation thing. I'm drinking from your hyper competency, and therefore my Bond meter is going up a little bit. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I'm very pleased whenever I do this. I always try and relate what Bond's had to today's dining, and we've all got our favorite places. We've all had our special meals, but everything that I've picked up from going around these restaurants, certainly in the 3 Michelin star restaurants, I mean, that's where you get some some pretty unique insight from the chefs. I mean, it's very lucky to be able to just sort of sit down and in some cases actually sit down at your table if the chef has got the time to speak. Yeah. And so anything I've picked, including the misnomers out there, because there are quite a few things that aren't as we think. For example, there are any number of places out there that will try and hoodwink guests into believing they're eating caviar, and they're not. You have to have, and a lot a lot goes to right down to the producer, just like with wine.
Hmm.
A great deal is in the hands of their expertise. And I mean, on the caviar front, just going back to that, I mean, it's almost, for me, I can sort of see when it's happened, and it's not the prices have gone up, and it sounds like, for example, Avruga caviar is just not caviar. It's either herring or halibut roe. It's not from sturgeon fish, and when that's sold as caviar, it's just a bit really.
Yeah.
So if wherever we do it, we will have top grade actual caviar from a sturgeon, and the right caviar as well. I mean, it's all got to be planned to the detail. So yeah, where I can, I very much enjoy just making sure these things are just right.
This is, and I do want to make mention of this. This is an important aspect for people to hear. This is absolutely not Richard concierging or making a reservation at a place and you show up and you just eat and leave. This is almost like immersive dining theater in a way, where you are authoring every play uniquely. And because of that, I do want to make mention that this is not going to be going out to Chuck E. Cheese and an elevated McDonald's. It's quite the opposite. If you want to think about it, and this is kind of an interesting way to think about it, per person, and if you're going to do this as a couple or for somewhere, even corporately. I mean, I could see a lot of companies, and I know you talked about corporately, you've done this for people. Think about this as a globetrotter per person, that type of equation where, creating the experience, depending on what that is, depending on the location and the length. And you've even tied this with, I'll call it a little bit more bond adventure like experiences, where you could be on a boat, and, you have a lot of different levels depending on the individual. And I would imagine part of that is speaking to the individual or the group and finding out what type of experience they want.
Yeah, well, on that note, that was a lovely one to do, and like many of the requests that come from various luxury lifestyle companies, I got wind that there was an NFL sports star and his wife that were visiting London and wanted to. I would love to say his name, but I don't, just in case I can't.
Totally
but, it was that was a delight if he and she watched this then publicly. I was absolutely, I adored that day. That was a bond lunch followed by some sights in central London, and then onto a private Venetian Riva where we had Bond's favorite champagne. And as we drove past MI6, we were toasting James's good health, obviously. And then that was wonderful. And every time I do this, it's very much, it must be brought to life. The one of the loveliest bits I had when I started doing it was, I got a hug from one chap at one stage, say, you just blew that out of the park, and I must read the books. I must start doing this. And that's a lovely thing to hear as well. But they're all completely bespoke. Like, yes, absolutely. And whatever the clients or the group are looking for, it's all craftable. Well, time and planning.
I love that. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give a pretty strong call to action here. After listening to this and listening to us wax poetic about my experience for 40 minutes and Richard's background and how he creates this is an opportunity for you to have these type of experiences. We've put Richard's contact information below. Again, these are highly curated, highly specific, Michelin star experiences. So please keep that in mind when thinking about the investment in these. But I will say, and I'll kind of end it on this, I will say that this is something that is unforgettable. This is something that is not your run of the mill where, in a week or two from now, you'll probably haze and forget this. We will remember those moments. My biggest regret of the day was that, if you remember, I had an event crushing us towards the tail end, and I had to kind of rush the very last aspect. And to me, I don't have many regrets in life. That was my one regret. I'm like, I only had another hour. But there it is.
Another time, perhaps. But yeah,
Another time, another place to do a club.
Thank you very much, David. I mean, it was first and foremost, it was an absolute pleasure having yours and Danielle's and Age's and Tim's company, and I'm so pleased we did that, because everything aligned, and to hear that it went that well, I'm over the moon. I'm thrilled, and it's really lovely to hear. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And Richard, thank you truly for doing these type of aspects, events, experiences. They're impactful, they're meaningful, and I know as Bond fans, or even Bond fan lights, whoever's listening to this, it's greatly appreciated.
Bless you indeed.
All right. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Bagnold. Again, we have his contact information below, and as always, this has been David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience, and we'll see you all real soon. Take care. Thanks for watching this episode. If you want to be up on the latest from the Bond Experience, just click on this subscribe and subscribe to our channel. You're going to get all the latest and greatest information, plus some exclusive content. And by the way, speaking of content, here's something especially for you, just because we know you. Talk to you soon.